2 hours ago, President Trump signed an executive order banning all Canadian crude oil imports effective immediately. Not phased implementation. Not negotiated transition. A complete shutoff of 3.8 million barrels per day that American refineries depend on every single morning. The timing could not be worse. It is August 15th. Hurricane season is accelerating. The National Hurricane Center is tracking 3 major systems in the Atlantic. And America's Strategic Petroleum Reserve sits at 38% capacity, the lowest level since 1983. The White House framed this as achieving energy independence. The reality is economic warfare against America's largest oil supplier over mineral extraction disputes that have nothing to do with energy security. Trump wanted cheap access to Canadian lithium and rare earth deposits. Carney refused. Now Canadian oil is banned. The order contains 3 mechanisms designed to choke American dependence on Canadian crude. First, all existing contracts for Canadian oil delivery are voided immediately with no compensation for breach. Refineries from Minnesota to Texas that negotiated long-term supply agreements just lost their guaranteed feedstock overnight. Second, any American company attempting to import Canadian crude through third-party nations faces asset seizure and federal prosecution. This closes the re-export loophole that companies might use to circumvent direct import bans. Third, all pipeline infrastructure carrying Canadian oil must be repurposed for domestic crude within 90 days or face federal seizure under eminent domain authority. The Keystone, Enbridge, and Express pipelines that move millions of barrels daily would be forcibly converted to carry American oil that does not exist in sufficient volumes. Washington expected Canada to panic. They expected Carney to call within hours begging to restore trade. They expected Canadian oil executives to pressure Ottawa into accepting American terms on mineral rights just to restore the energy relationship. None of that happened. But before we show you what did happen, if you value this kind of breakdown, hit subscribe and like this video so you never miss what comes next. Mark Carney appeared at a press conference in Ottawa exactly 90 minutes after the ban. Standing beside him was the CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. On screen behind them was a live feed from the National Hurricane Center showing Hurricane Elena intensifying to Category 4 strength 800 miles southeast of Louisiana. Carney spoke for 7 minutes. He opened with words that made oil traders around the world pause their screens. The United States has banned Canadian oil during hurricane season while its strategic reserve sits nearly empty. We are about to see what energy independence actually costs. Then he announced 4 responses that turned Trump's ban into an American crisis. First, Canada immediately halted all emergency crude oil sales to the United States. These sales, typically offered during supply disruptions at standard market rates, will no longer be available to American buyers under any circumstances until the ban is fully rescinded and a 5-year non-retaliation treaty is signed. Second, Canada is activating expedited contracts with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and India for long-term crude supply agreements. These nations, already competing for reliable non-Russian oil sources, agreed to terms within hours. Canadian crude previously flowing to America will now flow to Asia and Europe at premium prices. Third, all American oil companies operating in Canadian oil sands face immediate operational license reviews. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron hold combined assets worth over $60 billion in Canadian territory. Those licenses now depend on Canada's assessment of whether these companies represent nations that respect trade partnerships. And this was the statement that made energy markets spike. Fourth, Carney announced that Canada would offer humanitarian energy assistance to American states during the coming hurricane season, but only at emergency market pricing. The rate would be Brent crude benchmark plus 45% disaster premium. And every single barrel requires explicit approval from the Prime Minister's office with 72-hour advance request. Carney looked directly into the camera. We offered partnership. America chose confrontation. We offered stable supply. America chose bans. We will not leave American citizens without options during natural disasters. But sovereignty and security have a price. America is about to learn what that price is. No questions. He walked away. 72 hours later, Hurricane Elena made landfall near Galveston as a Category 4 storm. 23 refineries across Texas and Louisiana shut down following standard emergency protocols. These facilities represent 40% of American refining capacity. Under normal circumstances, they would restart within 2 weeks and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve would cover the gap. But circumstances were not normal. The SPR held only 239 million barrels, barely enough for 12 days of total American consumption. With Canadian imports banned and Gulf refineries offline, that reserve began draining at 4 million barrels per day. Within 96 hours of the hurricane, gas stations across the southeast started running dry. Prices spiked immediately. Regular unleaded hit $5.80 per gallon in Atlanta, $6.20 in Charlotte, $6.95 in Miami. By day 7, prices crossed $7.50 in major cities as panic buying accelerated depletion. The cascading effects hit fast. Airlines began canceling flights due to jet fuel shortages. Delta grounded 30% of operations. American Airlines cut 40% of routes. Ticket prices for remaining flights doubled overnight. Diesel shortages paralyzed trucking. Walmart and Target warned of supply chain disruptions. Grocery stores in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia reported empty shelves as delivery trucks could not find fuel. The agriculture sector faced crisis as harvest season approached with insufficient diesel for farm equipment. The White House requested emergency crude from the SPR only to discover that draining it further would leave America defenseless against additional hurricanes still forming in the Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center was tracking 2 more major systems. Using the SPR now meant having nothing left if another storm hit refineries still recovering from Elena. Trump had 3 impossible options. Rescind the Canadian oil ban and admit total strategic failure. Continue draining the SPR and pray no additional hurricanes strike. Or accept Carney's offer of emergency supply at 45% premium pricing that would cost American consumers billions. On day 9, with gas prices at $8.20 per gallon and the SPR at 11 days of supply remaining, the White House made the call to Ottawa. Carney's terms were non-negotiable. Full rescission of the oil ban. A binding 5-year treaty prohibiting retaliatory trade actions against Canadian energy. And immediate payment of the 45% disaster premium for all emergency crude deliveries. The President of the United States, who banned Canadian oil to prove American energy independence, was now begging Canada for oil at prices 45% above market rates because a hurricane exposed that independence as fiction. American oil industry executives were furious. The American Petroleum Institute called the ban the most economically destructive energy decision in modern history. Marathon Petroleum's CEO told shareholders the company lost $2.1 billion in a single week due to refinery shutdowns and supply chaos. Valero reported similar losses. These were not Canadian complaints. These were American energy companies telling their own president that banning reliable supply during hurricane season was economic suicide. The international response isolated Washington further. The European Union secured long-term Canadian supply contracts that reduced European dependence on Middle Eastern oil. Japan and South Korea celebrated diversifying away from unstable suppliers. India announced Canadian crude would help meet growing energy demands without geopolitical risk. Canada was not isolated by the ban. Canada redirected supply to buyers who would pay premium prices. America was isolated, paying disaster rates for oil it used to buy at market prices, because pride preceded a hurricane. 2 hours ago, Trump banned Canadian oil to prove American strength. 9 days later, he paid 45% premiums for emergency supply while gas stations ran dry and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve hit crisis levels. Mark Carney did not negotiate during the crisis. He simply reminded Washington that energy security requires partners, not confrontation. And partners do not ban each other's resources right before hurricane season. Trump wanted energy independence. He got $8.20 per gallon gas and empty SPR tanks. He wanted to punish Canada. He punished American consumers. He wanted to prove America does not need Canadian oil. A Category 4 hurricane proved otherwise. The ban lasted 9 days. The economic damage will last years. And every nation watching learned that weaponizing energy against reliable suppliers during natural disaster season is not strategy. It is self-destruction.